Welcome back to This Takes the Cake. I am Nina, the New York City office owner, and I am here with an amazingly special guest today, Brian Franklin. Brian is the founder of Vows and Speeches, a highly experienced speechwriter and public speaking coach dubbed the humorist by the New York Times. He's been featured in the New York Times, Brides, Bridal Guide, The Knot, Forbes, the New York Post, Wedding Chicks, and so many more. This is so awesome. Today on this episode, we're going to learn more about vows and speeches and the secrets to writing vows and speeches that are heartfelt and memorable. So welcome, Brian.
Nina, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course. Why don't we start off with you telling us a little bit of how you went from political consulting and songwriting to wedding speeches?
Sure. Yeah. Mainly out of desperation to get out of political consulting, given the environment that we're in these days, it ran its course. I had a very awesome career, had a lot of fun doing it for a while, but over time, it just started to wear on me as things seemed to get more and more divisive and whatnot. And I started looking for things that I could do that were in my skill set, that I could do remotely, that were not particularly political. So I got the idea. I had officiated a few weddings. I had helped some friends and family do wedding speeches and so forth, because of course I had that skill set. And
Right.
And I just started looking at first I started looking at wedding speeches, and some planners encouraged me to add vows and ceremony scripts for their internet ordained officiants that don't really know how to write a ceremony.
Right.
And so
Very
we
helpful.
added that. We put a flag up, and all of a sudden we were getting some clients, and things were, it didn't happen instantly, but it started to roll forward, and eventually we decided that this is something that we were going to jump into full time.
That's awesome. I mean, it's so interesting because there actually are similarities between writing a great wedding speech and a great political speech. So can you tell us a little bit about what those similarities are?
Sure. I think the biggest challenge is making sure that you're not talking too long, right? I mean, in both cases, and you'll see this more often at lower level political speeches, people go in there and they got a minute or two to summarize something really complex, some policies that they're putting out, or why you should vote for them versus somebody else. And it's not always particularly exciting material. And so you want to make it entertaining at some level, or powerful and moving at some level. And so I think that that thought process lends itself to writing vows, because you similarly are trying to take something that's extremely complex and very emotional to you, and then boil it down to 1 to 2 minutes and make it emotional for others. So it's hard. It's especially hard when you're that close to it to write, from the heart, and then edit yourself back and summarize the love of your life in 1 to 2 minutes,
Right. I always joke that, my husband is an incredible writer, and his vows at our wedding were so much better than my vows. And I wish that I had someone like you to help me with mine, because I would have felt so much better.
Thank you. I mean, I think that I wish I had someone like you thing, which we hear very often as we talk to people, that's what drives us. I mean, I think we know there's a market for this. We know that people need it. And part of this comes from personal experience. My wife felt like you did. And my wife's a fine writer. She totally could have made it happen in a great way, but she didn't feel well matched against me. And so it didn't even come up as a thing for our marriage back in, before we started this business, but it was something that we thought about when we did.
That's crazy. I mean, it makes so much sense, especially when you're trying to make the vows something that everyone enjoys. So talk to me a little bit about how humor is such a key ingredient in both vows and toasts.
Well, every marriage, or every relationship, I should say, I think everyone I've seen that is healthy or good and going in the right direction, at least, has an element of humor in it. I mean, your daily lives, if you're not chuckling with each other, I mean, if you're not laughing at each other and with each other, then something's wrong, right?
For
Or you're
sure,
just
for
extremely serious people, and maybe, I don't know, maybe there are people that do that and they just still love each other. But But everything else that I've seen, people laugh in their relationship, and things make them laugh, and they laugh together at other things, and I think those are the things that you have to talk about in your vows and in the ceremony, that part of your relationship that's kind of funny or that makes you laugh about the other person, not in any way that of course would embarrass them or
Right,
make
right,
them
right.
feel uncomfortable, but just to recognize that, yeah, humor's a part of your life. And you don't always know how to make jokes out of it, but there's definitely things that make you laugh. And so my job is to find those things as part of our interview process
Hmm.
and write them in a way that provides a little balance to the sentimentality and the love. And I, personally, I think that you can't have it all one tone. It has to have some
Right.
dynamics. So humor provides a little bit of relief, so you're not just bombarding people, punching them over and over again with the love stuff.
Yeah, that can sometimes get to be too much of the humor
Yeah,
and not enough of the love, or vice versa. And
right.
you mentioned interviews. Why are interviews so important when you're doing speech writing and not questionnaires? What's the big determining factor between the two of them?
Well, this is really, I think, the secret sauce for us. It's not really that secret, but it's the sauce,
Hmm.
and and because it starts with this: the questionnaires, you're asking someone that might not be a capable writer or someone that's particularly expressive to
Hmm.
then on their own write an answer to a question, which typically you don't get the kind of detail that you're looking for. You don't get a whole lot of flourish in there. But if I sit there and I'm talking to you and I get a sense of something and I go, wait, tell me more about that. Right.
Right.
Then I'm getting some details. Then I'm getting the good stuff. And people, I think, feel a little bit more comfortable talking generally than they do writing answers down. You also don't know what questions you're going to ask necessarily. I have hundreds of questions that I could ask, and I'm familiar with most of them, like off the top of my head. So I think for me, I'm going with the flow of it. I'm going to do them in a different order every time. I'm going to ask because I'm going to just kind of talk to you and find out this stuff, and then as we get deeper, you find more little nooks and crannies about the relationship that
Right, right,
become
right.
the personalization that you need for this thing to be unique and truly yours. And so I think that's the big thing. Most of our work is done in the interview process, because if we
Hmm.
do that interview well and we get that information, writing it becomes very easy, and it tends to write itself. And I'm not as worried about getting it on paper once I have the good material in the interview.
Right. What does that interview process look like? What kind of questions are you asking? How
Sure.
how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll ask. It goes far and beyond, like, how did you meet? I want to know what was on their Tinder profile that caught your eye, or whatever, like Hinge, or whatever you're using, right?
That was
Which
me,
it's like,
Tinder.
yeah, Hinge and Bumble, and then I would say Tinder's third right now in terms of my clients, but most of
That's
them
too
are online.
funny.
And I want to know what you remember from that profile. I want to know what that first interaction was like. Because sometimes that's fun, right? I remember
Hmm.
one where, she remembered seeing that the guy was like, he had a smart car and a daisy in his hair, and she thought that was funny, and she thought that
So
was funny,
funny.
right? Another couple got together because one of the prompts was like, what's your favorite taco place? And it happened to be the same favorite taco place that he had, and
Nice.
so they had something to go off of, right? So
Right.
those are the kinds of things where you go, like, if it wasn't for the taco place, maybe they're not together.
Right.
And that's the level of personalization you get to. I ask things like, hey, when you guys moved in together, what was something that you looked at that they had and you're like, what? Like, why did you bring this? Like, why do you have this, right? Or
Interesting.
what's something that you want to throw out of theirs, right? Things like that
That's a good one.
provide that provide some insight into how they live, and what are the fun but also what are the fun parts, but also like what are the parts that you have to live with or they have to live with about you,
Right.
to get to be together. And that's the stuff that really has you get a lot of fun with. And I also talk about conflict, like
Hmm.
how do you get past conflict? What's the when they're in a bad mood and it has nothing to do with you, what puts them in a good mood?
Right.
What's the recipe? You take them out for dinner? Like, what do you go
Hmm.
give them a glass of wine? How does this work? So, so you learn a lot.
That's awesome. What would you say the biggest mistakes are that people make when they're writing wedding toasts? Besides length,
With
because we all know
wedding
that.
toasts, yeah.
Yeah.
Besides, well, length is one thing. Obviously, length is the biggest and most common mistake. People
Hmm.
don't know how much they've actually written. They go in there. Sometimes they try and wing it, and they're not paying attention to time. So that's one of the biggest things. I think the next biggest thing is failing to provide balance in their toast for both of the couple, and addressing both of the couple in the toast, where they, you might have a friend or a family member that and or it's your sibling or something like that, and you spend all the time talking about your history with that sibling or that friend, and then you don't address their partner who has now
Right.
entered the picture, or at least not sufficiently. And I think that's a big one. Of obviously, people get into trouble when they start talking about things like exes and uh, excesses in their past. Right? Like, you
Yep.
don't really want to get into the embarrassing stuff when you know that their boss is going to be there, or
Right. 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 Right.
like when we were doing rails in that bathroom. Yeah, no, don't talk about that, right? Like let's leave that out. You can talk about that another time, not in front of
That can
the
be for
guy,
the bachelor party.
not right, not in front of their grandma and their grandma's friends, and and that kind of thing. So, and their bosses and their coworkers. So just using discretion, I think, is a big one too. Yeah.
Do you have like a simple structure that you recommend that anyone can use for a memorable toast?
I try not to keep what happens to everybody is you start to think about these things in terms of buckets, and then it becomes like too familiar.
Hmm.
So, the quick answer to that is I do, in the sense that if I have nothing else, if I have no better idea, then I know that I want to start with some kind of intro. If it's like, for example, if we're talking about a father of the bride speech,
Hmm.
you're obviously going to talk a little bit about their childhood, not
Hmm.
about how they got their teeth knocked out or when they got but you talk about how they were, some memories perhaps, and then you talk about how you feel about them as a person now,
Hmm.
and then you talk about their spouse, and then you talk about the couple as a whole, and then maybe you give advice, right? Those are broad buckets that if I have no better idea, then it's a pretty safe zone. But at the same time, what I try and do is, if I'm hearing a story or something that I can lead with that would flip things around a little bit and
Hmm.
make it fresher, then I'll do that. And so I it really depends client to client. I think they're all very different, but they all you do absolutely want to hit those different points at some point in it, just to make sure
Right.
that you've covered the right ground.
Right. 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 I'm sure you've had so many, wild or unexpected speech requests. Do you have a wildest one that you can share with us that's really a this takes the cake moment?
Well, I've had a couple. I've had I've had one or two where they really want to talk about their sex life, right? In their vows, right? Or that's the vows. But on the speech side, uh, I've had a couple want to talk about their exes and things like that, where I've steered them away from it. Really wild ones, no. I mean, I've had difficult ones where people just didn't like the spouse to be, right, or they didn't like their family
Ah,
member's
tricky.
fiance or their best friend's fiance or something like that. And I've had more than a few of those where you really have to find the good things to say.
Right.
I had one person that could not find one good thing to say.
Oh no.
I'm like, surely there's something, right? He's like,
What are you
well,
supposed to do in that
she's good at
moment?
getting her nails done. I mean, that's like, really, that's it. Um, but
Yeah, how do you
what
write
can
a
you do?
speech if you're not like over the moon about the significant other?
Well, first of all, you have to. Okay, you're going up there. You're The job is not to tell the truth. really.
True.
The job is to honor their happiness in whatever way they find it.
Hmm.
And they've asked you to be up there for whatever reason, maybe because you're just designated as that person, but whatever.
Right.
And what you should look at this is my one of my gifts to the couple is
Hmm.
to make this moment nice for them. It's not to go to confessional. It's not to try out your stand-up
Right, right,
comedy
right.
routine, right? This is not open mic night on the Thursday nights, comedy night. This is you going up there and giving them something that they will feel good about, and it's not going to ruin the wedding.
Right.
So I think so. What we focus on in those moments is like, okay, I get it that you don't like them as a couple, or him, or whatever it is. How has your friend changed in a good way? Right? What are the things that you see when you see them together? That when they're happy, no matter what you feel, right? How do you how do you when you see them? How are they feeling? How does that make you feel when she's happy, right? What are the changes that you might have seen?
Right.
What do you wish for them besides breaking up? Right. Let's assume they're going to stay together. What do you want things? Would you like it to go for them? And
Right.
and and that's how you skate through it. But and what are the qualities? Look, I get you don't like him. What parts do you like? Right. What is
Yeah,
it that
I
you
mean, you
like?
gotta like
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. What is he good at? Right. Is he good at something? Is he smart? Is he funny?
Hmm.
Ever? Right.
Ever.
I mean, there's got to be something.
Did
Right.
he make
And
one joke?
did he? Yeah, yeah. Has he ever smiled to you? Right? Have you guys ever had a good conversation? Right? And when did you get to know him? Was there something? Yeah, and you'll find it. You just have to.
Hmm.
Sometimes you really have to dig, and that's again going back to why you don't use a questionnaire,
Hmm.
right? And my difficulty with some of like the AI solutions here is that that's they're not going to ask those questions and they're not going to tell you what not to say.
Right.
So that's where working with someone that's actually going to interview you and as if you are running for office sometimes that's
They're not gonna
that's
tell
where
you that you shouldn't talk about sex in your vows with your grandma sitting in the front row.
right and you might need 5 follow-up questions to get to that thing that allows
Right.
you to do what you really want to do, which is to service the moment.
Hmm. And that can be so intimidating. Why do you think writing vows is so intimidating, and what do you think are ways to help make it easier?
Oh, I totally understand. First of all, most people have a public speaking fear to begin with, right? I
Hmm.
mean, that's just a thing for 75% of American adults. So, and I'm sure internationally. But you start off with that, and then you add the fact that you're talking about your emotions. You're talking about your love for somebody, whether
Right.
whether it's the vows or a friend or a family member or whatever it is.
Terrifying.
You're spilling your guts to some degree. It's a theoretically and supposedly a one-off moment, right? So you're not, you're not, this is your one time to do this and do it correctly. And you're doing it in front of a bunch of people, which is difficult sometimes. Sometimes it's easier to do this in front of strangers than your grandma
Right.
or your best friend or your snarky brother or whatever it is. So I understand the pressure of that. I think it's really a high pressure thing. You want to do it justice, and traditionally, these things have not had guidance. So most people feel very left out on their own, and I think that's one of the things we're trying to normalize. Is like, well, you got help with your hair. You didn't sew your own dress. You're not cooking your own food today.
That's
This
true.
is
You
a
didn't
big
plan your
let's
own wedding.
right. This is a big moment. Let's give you the guidance for this moment, which, by the way, happens to take up a fair bit of time between the ceremony and the speeches. You're talking about potentially 50 minutes to an hour. You
Right.
might, if you're lucky, you might want to give that hour some guidance and some value. And, so I think the cost proposition for that is pretty simple.
That's so true. And what do you think are ways that, people can avoid those cliche things and make their vows feel, really, really personal to them as a couple, yet, timeless?
Well, presuming, and we're talking if you're not using us, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I think, yeah. Uh, get as specific as you can. Let's start with that. I mean, I think the difference between one couple and another couple structurally, yeah, everybody get, yeah, everybody has a first date,
Hmm.
everybody, then you move in and blah, 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 right? And now you're here. You love each other. We all know that. Okay. Why? Right? What was it? What are the things that made that person different for you? What specifically makes you laugh? What specifically makes you swoon? Right?
Right.
And again, and say that in a way that's appropriate for your audience. What are when you get home at the end of the day, what makes you smile about them? Right? And uh, when you wake up and you see them, what makes you smile? Right? What do you love the way her her eyes look when she's sleeping, or whatever
Hmm.
it is, and say that, because that's the thing that's going to be different than the person next to you.
Right. And what about bringing humor in? You want everyone to go on that emotional roller coaster of your journey to getting married, but you also want to make people laugh during your ceremony. You don't want it to
Yeah,
be a crying fest for all your guests.
sure, right.
How can you
Look,
infuse humor in there without it being like a stand-up comedy routine or too much?
well, everybody, first, everybody wants something different. Like, I have clients that I'm working on one right now where she's very specific. I want this to be funny. That's how we are as a couple. We are always laughing. We are always making inappropriate jokes. We don't need it to be inappropriate, but I want it to be, I want it to be funny
Hmm.
and push it. So there are people that want a laugh a minute, and there are people that just want a little bit of humor, and everybody in between. It's
Hmm.
never all or nothing. It's always going to be, it's somewhere between 4 and 6 or 3 and 7, right?
Right.
Um, but I think when you look at it, it's more like, look at it like a set list in a band, like, or a concert that you go to. Some of you are into heavy metal, right? But the heavy metal bands, they still play like 2 or 3 acoustic songs or slow songs in the middle,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
To break it up, to give some relief. People that are into, I don't know, who's really like James Taylor or something. He's going to play 1 or 2 fast songs. He has
Right.
to,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
And so you have to look at it like, for every bit of sentimentality, there should follow that some level of humor, something light, something to balance that out, and vice versa. And the how much of each depends on you and your personality and what you're looking for. But and if you can't write the joke, and if you don't, I mean, that's when you need to get help, and that's why people come to us. But also, there are people in your life that are like, just riotous funny,
Right.
right? Ask them for help. Ask, like, say you want to write a joke about this, but you're struggling, right? And that's when you can find. I'm sure there's somebody in your life that you would go to and go, okay, I know that person can do it.
Hmm.
So get help.
And what about making them sound natural when they're spoken? Because I feel like you could write a letter and it's amazing on
It's a
paper,
great
but then
question.
when you speak it, it's so much different. So, what do you recommend to people trying to write their vows that, they want it to sound really natural?
Yeah, and it's something I didn't mention at the top. We also provide delivery coaching as a natural part of every
Oh, that's
package. So
awesome.
so it's not just the writing. We following that, like, we have unlimited revisions, and then we make sure they're happy with what's on paper, and then we practice it with them, and we practice their delivery, which is a major part of what we do. And it's something that I didn't think would be a major part until we did
Hmm.
it, and people really, really appreciated it. That's actually a time when if I haven't done this as I'm writing it, because I'll always read it out loud before I send it,
Hmm.
but sometimes there are just words that just don't sound like them. And there are phrasings that don't sound like them, or they trip over them, or whatever. And that's why one of the reasons why the delivery coaching is so important, because that's the opportunity for us to, like, make those edits that have to be made because they're speaking them out loud and it just doesn't
Right, right,
sound
right.
right. We contractions. I mean, I have a tendency to write "we are" instead of "we're," things like
Hmm.
that when I go and I read it for the first time, I'm always fixing it. because I
Yep.
just unconsciously spell it out. And then I'm like, people wouldn't say you are here. They'll say you're.
Right. But on
And that's
paper, it's
right.
you are.
On paper, it looks better that way. It looks more, and
Yep.
there's a rhythm to it. And uh, so that's part of it. I record everybody that I listen, that I interview, and I record these interviews so that I can not only get their wording, but I can also hear their tone. And so I'm trying to mimic that. And that was something I learned in politics, because every political
Hmm.
client, everybody spoke differently. They all had their different styles and cadences and levels of seriousness. And so you have to learn in advertising, period, how to become the brand of your client, essentially.
Right.
And that's, have the voice of your client. And I think that's something that we are able to do for them. But sometimes it takes a little work back and forth.
And I'm sure it depends on where in the country they are too, and what their accent is, and whether they say y'all or
Right.
not, and
Right.
things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Do you have any like real life examples of, incredible vows that you've helped craft?
Uh, you know, I, I think, I think I've had, a lot of them. One of the things that's difficult when people ask me that question is that, like, they're so personal and specific to them
Hmm.
that it's always a question in my mind is like, if I read somebody else's vows and you didn't know them, and or you weren't part of that family or at that event,
Right.
would it have the same impact?
It's
Uh,
true.
and there are moments, and again, like, style is so different from one person to the next. Uh, I think my favorite ones have been where they're open to just talking about what makes them laugh and what's crazy about them as a couple. And, like,
Hmm.
I love when they start talking about, like, I didn't really, there were a couple of red flags. I didn't, you had quite a few figurines from Dragon Ball Z as part of your collection, and things like that. I think one of my favorite ones was when we found out that we had a groom that was kind of off-putting, and he just didn't talk to strangers and stuff like that. And we later find out he learned every lyric to uh, Ariana Grande's albums, because he was taking his fiance to Ariana Grande, and it's her favorite artist, and he wanted to be able to
So
sing along with her.
sweet.
I know, right? So but this was a person that, like, by every other definition, you wouldn't know that that's the guy, right?
Right.
And so I think those are the kinds of moments for me that when you reveal them, whether it's in the ceremony or in the vows themselves,
Hmm.
that's like, oh, right. And that's the stuff
That's
that
the
gets
gut
you
punch.
crying. That's the gut punch. For me, it is. And so, it's not like this canned line. We have a couple canned lines that you could pull out. It's like,
Hmm.
but that's not going to really knock people over the same way as learning that the guy runs around also singing Disney songs, and that, this tough plumber is your dude. Like,
Yep.
he's the romantic one, and that's the one. Those are the ones that, like, you go, okay, that's why you're doing this.
Yeah, totally. What about the opposite ends of the spectrum? What about like the funniest or the most cringeworthy speech disasters
Well,
you've witnessed?
oh, I haven't witnessed them. What I've been doing is talking to planners all over the country, and I ask them, like, what are your stories? What have you seen in your,
Hmm.
15, 20 years or whatever it might be? And and not just planners, I've been talking to videographers and photographers. So I've got a whole litany of them. I think some of the worst of them, I mean, I remember, a mom getting up in front of the audience before the wedding even started, and to itemize what each vendor costs and how much the whole wedding spent, or how much she spent on the whole wedding. I'm sorry, and then how much she has left in her bank account. And so basically, you better all like this, right?
What?
Yeah, yeah, that happened. The groom
Never.
the groom who and this was a wedding planner that caught this and stopped it, but one of the groomsmen, or the best man, had written imaginary love letters from all of the groom's exes to the groom, and he was going to read these imaginary love letters that were, things like that. There was a groomsman that apparently best man that got all the groomsmen to hold their keys and be ready, and then said, "Okay, jingle your keys if you slept with the bride," right? Stuff like that.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
yeah, yeah. Pregnancies that were disclosed without, things like,
Oh, that's
yeah.
a tough one.
I heard one the other day. There was a best man or a maid of honor that they disclosed that the groom had been married before, and I guess that was not common knowledge to most anyone. So
Oh,
yeah, so there was like the whole crowd was like you could see it ripple through the whole crowd.
right.
So people do the darndest things, right? And you have to. And if you're listening to this and you're engaged, or if you're another planner or somebody, you have to ask: is there anybody in your wedding party that is afraid of public speaking, or you're afraid of what they're going to do or say publicly? Are they going to drink 12 bourbons? Are they going to wing it?
Hmm.
Are they the kind that will go long? Do you trust your father or father-in-law to do
Right.
well with this and to keep it on time?
I
Right? Do you
always ask the
trust your
question of, is there anyone you're concerned about going rogue?
right? Yeah, that's the same question,
Whether it's
right? Yeah,
speaking or
yeah,
doing something inappropriate, or
right. Are
do we
they
need to
going to
monitor
go rogue?
alcohol for anyone?
Right. And if you decide that you're going to intervene on that early enough in the preparation of your wedding, and I would say start talking about this at the beginning, not the end, because you want to
Hmm.
budget for it. That's one thing, but also the more time that you have, the more time that you give them, that's more time for them to practice. It's more time for them to write, and they'll get it right. If they've put time into it, they will do it. So I think you have to really intervene on their behalf a little bit earlier,
Right.
and then then you won't have to worry about it, and then it'll be a great moment. And you've paid for the
Hmm.
videographer. You want him to have good content,
Right,
right?
right, right.
So let him have good content.
I always ask to make sure that someone else has read the speech or the toast or the vows, just to make sure that we know that everything's good.
Right,
Whether or
right.
not it's like a good speech or good vows, we just want to make sure they're appropriate and they're not hitting any of the wrong moments. But
Yeah,
what
and
about when they're not confident? How can you make people feel more confident when they're delivering
that's
their vows or speeches? Because
it's a
confidence is
huge part of our
huge.
work. Yeah, it's a huge part of our work. I would say at least half of the people we work with are coming from a place of just deep insecurity about how they will do up there, and as a public speaker,
Mhm.
or worried about crying, worried about coming across the right way, all that stuff. And the way to handle that is to get help, for one, get help with it, because when you've written something with somebody else, you're going to feel differently about it than if you did
Right.
it yourself without any feedback or guidance. So get
Hmm.
help. Make sure that it feels right to you. Give yourself enough time to write it or rewrite it or have somebody do that, so that you can make sure that you have copy that you really, really think is the right thing, and this is great.
Hmm.
Right? That's part one, because if you have that, you're going to go into part two so much differently. When you get up there and you've actually practiced delivering it with somebody, and they've given you guidance as to how to act it out, or how to, hey, emphasize this word for comedic effect, or you're going too fast, or you're speaking too flatly, and you need to raise your voice a little bit and make
Right.
a little bit more tone and have a little bit more dynamics in it, so that when you get to that sensitive part, you can go a little closer to the mic and be really emotional.
Hmm.
If you could do that, once you've if you've got good copy and then you've had good preparation, you are not going to feel the same level of anxiety. You are going to feel much better about it. And I've had people that were terrified to go up there, that I text them afterwards. How did it go? I killed it. Big caps, right? Thank you. These people said it was the best speech they've heard, and blah
Oh,
blah blah.
I love
And
that.
it's like, whether it was or it wasn't, they felt great about it. And
Right.
so, it's that's what you want to achieve. And I
And what
love it every
about
time
for
I get
like
it.
dealing with those interruptions that always happen at weddings, whether it's a drunk guest going crazy or a mic turning off in the middle of speaking or anything like that? How can you prepare?
Well, you got to be prepared. First of all, I think that happens so rarely in terms of people interrupting a speech in any meaningful way. Like, I mean, somebody like literally falling over and stop. You might want to make sure they're okay. And like just
fair, fair.
But
can't have any emergencies that involve ambulances.
But you're going to get background noise. You're going to have waiters drop things. You're going to, I mean, there's always going to be some kind of distraction. I tell them to plow through if they can. And if there's something that's truly interrupting and you can, you can make a quick comment about it and get right back to it. I mean, I think sometimes you just have to plow through and keep talking.
Right.
Most of our clients, they're people that have, they have done something somewhere before, right? Like it's not like they haven't been in business necessarily and had to do some level of talking. So they know this stuff happens. And so it's just getting them to a point where they feel good about what they're doing and good about the content and then focusing on the couple. And that's the other thing, rehearsing it enough times. You want people to do this 15, 20 times at least so that they can feel a level of fluency with it. So there's flow. They're not reading it word for word. They're kind of reading it phrase by phrase or sentence by sentence. And that allows you to focus on eye contact. It allows you to really emote it and to feel it and feel the moment and be present and not just buried in your piece of paper or whatever. And so, when you get to that point, you're able to handle that other stuff.
Do you think that speeches are getting better overall, or do we think that they're trending in the wrong direction and getting a little worse?
I think they're getting better. I think social media has, and TV to some extent, but I think mainly social media has created an environment where people see the good stuff and the bad stuff. You see both ends of it, right? And so there's more education out there about like what makes these moments beautiful and moving, and more information and certainly more content out there that what ruins them. And so I think people are a little smarter than they used to be about it. The flip side of that is there's so much out there that can make it generic, so many templates and so many, people literally, that was another thing I got from a planner, was where she saw that two people had the exact same speech that they pulled off the internet.
Oh my goodness.
And did it. They didn't even one didn't even edit it. Like they both did it at the same wedding. Yeah. So, oops is right. So there's so many things out there that can make it generic. And again, that's where you go back to find the ways to make it specific to you and to your relationship, and try and avoid things like, for those that don't know me, don't ever say that ever.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Do you think that people are trying to have their speech go viral, or do you think more people are just trying to keep it meaningful?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think people hope that they're going to do such a great job that it could go viral. I think but I don't know if that's the motivation for people. I think people, when they're doing this, they're just trying to get through it. They're nervous about it. I don't know anybody that shouldn't be nervous about it at some level, right? Even if you think you're great and you've got something great and you will do well, you still have no comic, even great comics, like the best of them, they have nights where the crowd just doesn't react.
It's true.
Not the way that they think it's going, not the way that Milwaukee did or whatever, right? And so I think you always have to be a little bit worried, and that's what keeps you on your toes.
What about like drinking before the speech? Do you recommend that people don't drink before the speech or limit their drinking?
I think limit it to the extent that you don't want to be up there slurring.
Right.
You don't want to be sloppy. There was one of my attempts to get out of politics was I tried to take consumer psychology studies and repackage them for political advertisers, right? And one of the things that I found was there was a study where uh, they had sober people look at people that were drinking in increments to judge their level of attractiveness on a photo, right? And they said they were most attractive after like 1 to 2 drinks, right? But
Interesting.
right, and there's some theories as to why. Like maybe it's the facial flushing, but they're still not
Hmm.
but they're not sloppy. You get to 3 or 4, then you can tell there's a little fuzziness in the eyes, and there's
Right,
things
right,
like
right.
that, right? So if you're a drinker, I think maybe it doesn't hurt to maybe be a little loose, but you don't
Hmm.
want to get to the point where anybody could perceive you as being drunk or 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 sloppy. You want to be in command, uh, or just don't drink. If I mean that's the other option if you can
Hmm.
not drink. But I think most people want to go there. They want to celebrate. They want to do the thing,
Right, right,
right?
right.
And so I think it's not realistic to say don't drink, but definitely consider the fact that if you get up there and you're sloppy, it's going to look, people are going to see it.
For sure, for sure. Are you finding people are trying to use AI generated vows a lot? Do you think it's awful? Can it be helpful?
I, you know, I don't personally know of anybody that does that. I mean,
Hmm.
I know there are companies that do that, and I think there are situations in which it could be helpful to people. Uh, Editing, sometimes you can run it and get better grammar or whatever. Uh, I don't. I personally, when I read copy, I can tell that it's AI. I can read it. There's just
Yeah,
something
there's
about
certain
it,
words that like
right? There's
are just
certain
not.
phrasing. Yeah, I
Yeah.
tried to replicate my own vows. I did the questionnaire and I tried to see because you have to see like how close
Right.
is this to what we're doing, and it was frankly it was laughable. But that said, we are a high touch service and it's not for everyone. And I
Right.
think if you need help and you can't find help elsewhere, and it could be helpful to you if you're a terrible writer and you just need something. But I think at that point it's a starting piece, right? You want to then customize it and make it as non AI as possible. But I think that's a lot of work. I think it's harder to do that than to just not use AI and figure it out.
Right. What about the other different forms of vows that are becoming more popular? Song lyrics, poetry, scripted dialogue, things like that.
I mean, I love putting song lyrics into vows and ceremonies personally.
Hmm.
Uh, Especially like if I know that a couple bonded over a band or something like that. They're really into I don't know, Mumford and Sons or whatever it is.
Hmm.
If there's a song that defines them as a couple, if there's something, I might pull a lyric here, a line or two out of that. I might pull a joke from those things,
Hmm.
as like as the great philosopher Chappelle Roan said,
Yep.
something like that, and make fun of it to a certain extent. Uh, but that again, things that make it like super personal and
Right.
opportunities for humor. Those are absolutely part of it. When I hear a reading that isn't like that, when it is a little bit more serious, it better be really good, or I tend to get bored personally, right?
Totally.
And so I don't know, like poetry's not for everyone. So it's just a question of how you do it. Look, and also this is your show. If you're
Right, right, right,
if you
right.
want to get up there and do some poetry or something scripted, then do it. But it's not necessarily going to play the same way with the audience. Just it's your show. But if you want something that's a little bit more traditional but still fun, then that's where I think there are people like us that can help you.
That's awesome. Okay, I have a couple rapid fire questions. You ready?
Sure. Okay.
Worst wedding toast opener.
For those that don't know me, easily. But
So
also, yeah.
overused.
Yeah, it's so overused. It's just so people don't know not to use it, which I can't understand. But also, uh, yeah, that and perhaps don't start with some letters from the person's exes or something like
Fair,
that.
fair. What's one phrase that should never be in vows?
Oh, uh, I love you to the moon and stars just bugs me. But I mean, again, I keep coming back to for those who don't know me. I mean, but in vows, that's actually wouldn't be in that wouldn't be in vows. Sorry, I was
That's
thinking
true. That's
toast.
true.
In vows, I think. Oh, I know. That was it was one of the viral ones on TikTok. I get more. What was it? I'm going to keep smacking that ass. Right. Right. Yeah. There was a guy there that they're like, what do you have to say? He goes, well, I love you and I can't wait to keep smacking that ass. And then the ceremony officiant's like, is there more? There's got to be more. Right. And he's like, well, I'm going to keep doing it. Like it was terrible. You can, I'm sure people could find it. Yeah.
Definitely
it's amazing.
not a good
Don't
one.
say that. Yeah. Don't put that in your vows. Don't talk about, I had, like I said, I had somebody want to talk about their vigorous and passionate love life. Probably not the best place for it in vows.
Not for grandma.
Not for grandma.
Best piece of speech writing advice in one sentence.
Don't just do one sentence. Right. That's the other thing that people do. I've exceeded your sentence requirement here already, but yeah, don't do it in one sentence, and be as specific as you can about the things that you feel and see.
Smart. Very smart. What's the one moment at a wedding that always gets you emotional?
Oh, it's the vows. I mean, when people do their own vows, and it's sorry, I can't even talk. It's a declaration of love,
mm-hmm.
and an intent and hopes. But mostly it's, I'm listening to you tell somebody how much they mean to them and how much they love them and why. And when it's done right, it's the most powerful moment in the wedding, because that's when everybody's crying. That's what everybody's there for. That's
right.
Why we're here, to watch you do this, and you're telling us why, and you're giving meaning to the entire event. And that's a really powerful moment, and that always gets me. Now, I cry. I'm a crier, right?
Me too.
So
I'm right
I'm going to see them. I might have already cried as they're walking down the aisle, but and I always love that moment. Besides the vows, I always love that moment when they're walking down the aisle and the groom, sees them and starts to choke up, right? Yeah. Like that part gets me too. That's always great.
I feel like the vows always get me because they talk about the incredible parts, the challenges that they've faced, and like what the future holds. And sometimes those challenges really, really get you, and it's so hard.
Yeah, that's part of your story too. You don't want to spend a whole lot of time on negative things, right?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes people, I had one couple that, where the guy got into a bad accident and she basically nursed him, for a year. And that's part of your story, right? Or when somebody died along the way and they kept you going.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of it. And I think it's an important part of your story. And so you can touch on it and give life to it for a little bit, but then, bring it back and maybe say something fun.
Totally. It's the best part of the wedding.
Yeah. So, I love the vows.
Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. We've been so lucky to be able to talk to you. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Sure. On the web, it's vowsandspeeches.com. That's VOWSANDSPEECHES.com. And then same with Instagram. Instagram is Vows and Speeches. You can reach out to me directly via the website. My phone and email are there. And I'd love to talk to anybody, whether it's a couple or other pros that just want to know more about it. And just consider how important these moments are to you and how big of a deal they could be. And then we'll work together to make it so.
That's awesome. Do you guys have any upcoming projects or trends that you're excited about?
I've got a few weddings that I'm really excited about. I'm doing one right now where I'm doing pretty much everything. I'm doing the vows, the ceremony, the speeches. And so the entirety of those sections are kind of up to me. And that's fun also because you can you can perhaps give some guidance on the order. Like this one's going to be good, but this one's going to be fantastic, and crescendo the whole thing, and
they can all like feed off of each other.
They can all feed off of each other.
Create a story.
When I'm doing both vows, I know what they're going to talk about. I can kind of interweave it a little bit, especially if I know the order. So, which could be a lot of fun. So, I've got one really, really big wedding, coming up that I'm really excited about. That's, next month. And then, we're just really excited to keep bringing this to people and building the business and doing more and more.
Amazing. Any final words of wisdom for anyone about to, get started on their vows or their speech?
Well, I whether you hire us or not, I do have some tips for both vows and for people giving wedding speeches on our website. So if you go check out vowsandspeeches.com, you'll find them.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brian. We've been so lucky to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
You can check us out on our website or find us on Instagram, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks, guys.